Hi everybody, we are in the Friday of the second week in Advent and we're looking at Isaiah chapter 48 verses 17 to 19. In the past chapters we have heard of Babylon's final fate, but the very idea of the people's fate has turned Isaiah's attention on Israel. It has put Israel under the microscope. Is Israel so much better than other countries, just like we are better than others? No, they are not. The only difference is that God has a purpose for Israel, just as He has a purpose for you and me. Isaiah chapter 48 almost seems to be a sermon that Isaiah gave to the Israelite exiles in Babylon as they worshipped in the synagogue on a day of what seems to be penitence. These verses are the most confrontational against the gods of the nations. But the Lord here is not talking only to the heathen nations. He's also talking directly to the Israelites. They should know better than to worship heathen gods and idols. You see, God's children were just being stubborn. Though all were not guilty, the whole community was judged as one community. Many still stood firm against Yahweh and clung to idols and did not want to respond to Him under any circumstance. Of the rest, some were sincerely worshipping God, while others were going through the motions of worship. Their outward expressions of faith were hollow and untruthful. While the people invoke God's name, they have a personal agenda, an outcome they were looking for. They lay claim that they are God's people, but by their behavior, they were no different from those who do not invoke God's name. There should have been some evidence of salvation, but somehow the message does not match the manner. The fruit of their lives outside the sanctuary is nothing like the guise of godliness within the sanctuary. So the Lord makes it clear. He can neither be deceived nor tolerate such hypocrisy, and we read this in verses 4 and 8. You see, even the best teacher fails when his pupils are unwilling to learn. And God is lamenting this reality in verse 18. He was the teacher who taught the Israelites for their own good, as we read in verse 17, who led them where they ought to go, and yet they paid no attention to God's commandments, as we read in verse 18. The tragedy of Israel could easily have been avoided, but the prophet reminds her that all of her past history was one unending tragedy of squandered opportunities. This, of course, places the responsibility of Israel's tragic state squarely upon the people themselves. Contrary to popular opinion that suggests there's no point dwelling on the past, we are taken to the past to contemplate what could have been or what is as a result of choices made. The reason for this is to learn how to go forward. Surely things could have been different. Too often we tend to look at what could have been and the ground lost because what we failed to be. God does not pretend it did not happen. The way forward is to face the past as God does by outlining what could have been in chapter 48 verses 17 to 19. History is a great teacher. Teaching from the past, God offers hope by giving a glimpse of what can be, and we see this in verse 20 and 21. God really wants us to pick up the road, the right road, the road that lines up with His great plans for us. And He can see what's on all the roads out there. He can see which one is best, and He wants to let us know that. I thank you for being part of these daily reflections. If you are watching us for the first time, please do subscribe to this channel. And as your daily evangelization, share this video with your friends, because that is how we make a difference to the world. Continue to enjoy the season of Advent.